Hey everybody, how are you doing today? I'm Brandon Upson. I'm the founder and executive director of Amplify Action. Thank you so much for joining us. Amplify Action is a nonprofit organization, and we're focused on building political power within our communities through the civic education and civic mobilization of Black men in the South. We will register 110,000 Black men this year. We're excited to do the work, but we can't do it without you. Thank you so much for everyone who supported us in our amazing launch. From our virtual conversations with Jamie Harrison and Congressman G.K. Butterfield of North Carolina, to joining our brothers at the Million Man's March in Columbia, South Carolina, where Amplify supporters were able to register over 500 new voters. But it didn't stop there. We registered over 1,000 Black men in the first 10 days of our launch. Needless to say, Amplify Action is on the move, and we continue our momentum this afternoon, and I'm so excited to say this, as we are joined by Congresswoman Maxine Waters. But before we get to the Congresswoman, we have a couple quick announcements. Last month, we also heard and was joined and honored by the support of Mayor Stephen Reed of Montgomery, Alabama. We also received the support of Ms. Tequila Johnson of the Equity Alliance in Tennessee. Also, during this live session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions directly to the Congresswoman. So please put your questions in the chat box or in the comment section. And if you are watching this on Facebook or Twitter, please take a moment right now to share and retweet this live stream. We want as many people as possible to hear what the Congresswoman has to say today. Now, I'm going to pass it over to our dear friend, Lawrence Wilson, for a very special introduction. Then after that, we will hear from the Congresswoman herself. And then we'll be joined by our senior advisor, Jamar Brown, for our question and answer session. But now to Lawrence Wilson. Hey, Lawrence, how you doing, brother?
Hey, Brandon. Hi, everybody. My name is Lawrence Wilson, and I'm a St. Louis native, a political brand strategist, and an event curator. I have worked on political campaigns all over the country, working to elect leaders who will put the interests of our community first. Above all that, I am proud to support Amplify Action to build on this amazing brand and ensure this movement can be taken to the next level. I am honored this afternoon to introduce someone. I'm honored this afternoon to introduce someone who really needs no introduction. Today, Amplify Action is joined by Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California, and also a St. Louis native. With over 40 years of public service experience, Congresswoman Waters is considered by many to be one of the most powerful women in American politics today. She has gained a reputation as a fearless and outspoken advocate for women, children, people of color, and low-income people. Congresswoman Waters is living history right now as the first woman and first African-American chair of the House Financial Services Committee. An integral part of congressional leadership, she serves as a member of the Steering and Policy Committee and is the co-chair of the Bipartisan Congressional Task Force on Alzheimer's Disease. She is also a past chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus. For the duration of her career, Congresswoman Waters has served as a member of the California State Assembly and as a member of the Democratic National Committee. Without further ado, I introduce to all of you Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Congresswoman.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. That was a very kind and generous introduction. And I'm always pleased to be with you, whether we're on a virtual meeting or whether you're in my office or whether we're just talking on the telephone. And I want to thank you for your interest in voting and your support of Amplify Action. This is very important. And I also want to thank both the co-moderators, Brandon Upson and Jamar Brown, for this event today. This is very important, and I'm very impressed with the information that I've learned about Amplify Action so far. Let me just give you a little bit of a historical perspective. Let me give you a little bit of a historical perspective to understand and appreciate what it means to get involved and participate in our democracy. You need to understand that since our founding, the United States has been engaged in a constant struggle to realize the right of all people, regardless of race, color, or gender, to vote and engage in civic participation. Following the Civil War and the abolishment of slavery, the most widespread form of voter suppression, particularly in the South, was violence and intimidation. Blacks who tried to vote were threatened, beaten, and killed. They had their homes burned down to the ground. Blacks relied on whites for employment or land and were often intimidated into not voting under the threat that they would be fired or evicted. Near the end of the century, policies called the Jim Crow laws began to pass state legislatures. These laws existed solely to strip Black men and women of their right to vote and participate in local politics, and included poll taxes, literacy tax, requirements to own property before you can vote, voter roll purging, banning felons and ex-felons from voting, voter ID laws, closing polling places, restricting early voting and access to the ballot. And in some cases, the violence and death threats continued. Despite all of this, African Americans throughout the history risked their lives and property in order to cast votes. Even after segregation and Jim Crow, voting laws came to a formal end in the South with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Modern politicians remain susceptible to the temptations of racist dog whistles as a way to gain and support the support of white voters and justify restricting minority voting rights. For instance, we've recently witnessed states like Pennsylvania, Arkansas, Wisconsin, and North Carolina pass strict voter identification laws, which hurt turnout and target African Americans with almost surgical precision. We've also witnessed the creation of a so-called exact match policy in Georgia that disqualifies voters if their names do not precisely match records because of typos, missing hyphens, or clerical errors, which we know potentially impacted tens of thousands of voters in that 2018 election alone. We saw the Supreme Court's 2013 Shelby County versus Holder decision, which invalidated key parts of the Voting Rights Act that had been regulating states with a history of voter suppression. In the years since that ruling, over 1,000 polling places have been closed across the country, a majority of which were located in predominantly African American communities. And so these types of voter suppression, both historical and modern, are intentional attempts to steal our right to vote and our right to get involved in politics and our communities. However, these tactics are not the only obstacles to civic participation that we face today. What are we talking about? We're talking about coronavirus pandemic. There are more than 3 million coronavirus cases and more than 131,000 coronavirus related deaths in the United States. Latino and African American residents of the United States have been 3 times as likely to become infected as their white neighbors, and Black and Latino people have been nearly twice as likely to die from the virus as white people. Let's take a look at this economic crisis. During this deadly public health crisis, more than 40 million Americans are unemployed. Families are experiencing homelessness. Parents are struggling to put food on the table. Small and minority-owned businesses are struggling to stay afloat. College graduates are struggling to find jobs, and high school graduates are nervous about their future. Well, we have been witnessing the biggest protest maybe that this country has ever known recently. And it was all about police brutality, young Black men and women killed with impunity. In the midst of all of this, on Memorial Day, we witnessed video footage that many of us will never forget. A white police officer murdered an unarmed Black man and Father George Floyd by holding his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. George Floyd joins a long list of, including Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Walter Scott, Sandra Bland, Botham Jean, Antiana Jefferson, and countless other Black men and women who were killed with impunity. Well, it's happening all over this country. Recently, we had a young Latino man in my district, right near my district, and was shot in the back 5 times by the sheriffs. The sheriffs, of course, took some actions afterwards that we all have learned about their tactics and the way they do this. They ended up breaking the cameras that were positioned that took photos and photographs of what happened. And we don't know whether or not they've been destroyed. And so these are the kinds of things that we're now tracing and we're watching and we're having to follow and we have to correct. What people must understand is that there's perhaps no greater weapon against these injustices and crises that we are bearing witness to today than the vote. There's too much to fight for today, from effectively fighting a pandemic to demanding police reform for us to be silenced. The good news is that everywhere you look, there are signs that young people are just fed up. They're seeing the police brutality today like we saw it years ago with Rodney King and so many others that are seeing this administration's response to the pandemic. They're seeing the looming economic crisis, and they feel that enough is enough. They're speaking out and making their voices heard. By the way, the young man who died because of being shot in the back 5 times right at the edge of my district was Andres Guardado. And of course, we are following up to see if we can't get an investigation starting at the state with our Attorney General, and we're prepared to go to the Civil Rights Division of the FBI and the Attorney General's office. We don't know with this administration, but we're going to keep on this case. Good news is that everywhere you look, again, these young people are saying we're not taking it anymore. And so they're speaking out and making their voices heard in ways that was never done before. There are many ways to get involved. And of course, we just heard, I guess in the most profound way, the work that you're doing here in your district with Amplify Action to get young people registered to vote. Well, registering to vote and to show up to vote is the answer. We must help our families and communities register to vote. If you're voting by mail for the first time or know someone who is, take charge and take the initiative to learn how that process works, because it isn't always simple. The energy that young people take to the streets must be harnessed to learn more about our voting options and how to vote when the day comes. Use the social media, all the social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and the latest one, TikTok, can be powerful tools for change. We wouldn't know about most of the police brutality incidents without these videos going viral on social media. So use it. Make injustices you see known by engaging in your online communities. Fill out the census. We must fill out the census and ensure our friends and family fill it out too. An undercount in our neighborhoods would mean that we receive less federal funding for vital programs, which includes everything from hospitals and health centers to small business development and school lunch programs. Learn about the local elected officials. Never ignore your local elections and get to know each and every one of your local, city, county, and state elected officials. There's no level of government that is more directly responsible for serving your community than your local elected officials. And they're responsible for everything: schools, policing, public safety, rent, public transit, alcohol and drug ordinances, job training programs, and so on. Your vote also makes a huge difference in local elections. Typically, only 1 in 5 voters participate in off-year local elections. So your voice and vote is powerful. Never stop protesting when you see something you know isn't right. Never stop using your voice, even when it seems like it won't make a difference. Your voice and participation makes it that much harder for the crooked and corrupt to get away with whatever they're up to. Don't let them. So in conclusion, every election matters. It is the mayors and counties that appoint police chiefs and work with police unions. It is the district attorneys and the attorney generals who decide whether police should be prosecuted for their brutality. Every election matters. There's a lot of discussion about 2020 being the most important election in modern history. I believe this is true. I've been a public servant long enough to understand that we are experiencing a moment in our nation's history, the likes of which we have never seen before. African Americans have always fought to make this democracy more equal and more just. And in the final analysis, I believe that we can and will make the difference at the polls and get this country back on track. And so, thank you for inviting me today. I wanted to give you a little bit of that history and kind of, tell you how important it is for you doing the work that you're doing. And we're very proud. I'm very proud. And I'm very pleased about what you shared with us about the number of young Black men that you have already registered to vote. And so, of course, I want you to keep up the good works. And I want to remind you that there's so many ways that they suppress the vote, even after you get people registered and voting. They get turned away at the polls for all kinds of reasons. This voter match that I talked about, they're throwing out the vote before they even get a chance to get to the polls or to do absentee ballot voting. They're looking to see if the T was crossed or the I was dotted. If it's not an exact match, they can throw it away. And so, in addition to registration and voting, getting to know the voter registration process, who the voter registrar is, learning where the polling places are going to be placed, how many are there, learning how the vote by mail system works. Is a vote by mail ballot going to be sent to everybody? Do you have to request it? Et cetera, et cetera. The more we learn, the more effective we can be. Again, let me thank you and congratulate you for the work that you're doing. I'm extraordinarily proud of you. And Lawrence, thank you for connecting me. I think it's so very important for you to use your connections to share them in ways that will help everybody with the job that we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Waters. I really just thank you. I've been excited. Like today was Christmas. Like I couldn't sleep last night. I was so excited to have you on and just express my sincere gratitude for your hard work and your fight. I know there's many times where you've been a lone voice fighting and advocating for our community, and I can tell you ain't tired yet, as my friend would say. So thank you for your wisdom and the continued fight. Also, I believe knowledge is power, and you really empowered us today. Just by coming on here and supporting what we're doing with Amplify Action, you've literally amplified our work and allowed us to share our mission with thousands of people who are joining us right now. I was just looking across our platforms and there's literally thousands of people listening. So I just thank you again. Now I'm about to pass it over to our senior advisor, Jamar Brown, who's going to take us into question and answer. But thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brandon. And again, thank you for your leadership at Amplify Action and with your amazing team of folks. And again, thank you to Lawrence for making this very important connection. So good afternoon, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
We have been just waiting, as Brandon said, like Christmas, to be able to speak with you today. I just want to say how honored I am as a young Black man who is involved in politics over the past 15 years to really be able to share this space with you right now for what is so critical right now in this election. And so thank you again for being here. Just a little bit about myself for everyone here. My name is Jamar Brown, and I live in Austin, Texas. I work with Amplify Action and supporting Brandon. But also, I serve as the director of electoral programs at an organization called Repower, where we train progressive organizations across the movement to find people to run for office, to find people to work on campaigns, and to organize all the things that you talked about here today, Congresswoman. And so I'm based right now in Austin, Texas. And so we have some questions. So for those of you who are watching, wherever you are, make sure that you're putting your questions in the chat. We have our team that will be watching the questions. And so I'll make sure I have those. But one of the things, Congresswoman, that I want to just highlight on is you talked a lot about some of the oppressions that we faced as a Black community. You talked about throwing away the votes even before they get there. You talked about now the pandemic that we're dealing with. And we're not even talking about the pandemic of racism, right, that we've been dealing with for over 400 years in this country. And so there's across the country, what we've been hearing is that Black men feel like they don't have a place. They don't have a voice. And we have a critical election that's happening right now, not just for the White House, but for district attorney seats, for state house seats, for hopefully folks to join you in Congress, school board seats, right? And so when folks are going to vote in those elections, what messages can we give folks, or for folks who are listening, can give Black men in their communities a message of hope and why they need to get involved right now?
Well, thank you so very much. And I'm so pleased that you're focused on what is happening with Black men in our society. Let's not forget that they have been basically victims in so many ways, whether it is over incarceration, whether it is being discriminated against in trying to, have a job or a business, the lack of lending for these businesses that could be successful if the banks were treating us fairly, on and on and on. And so many Black men, I think, have given up on the system. The system does not work for them. And so that is one of the reasons why I think they don't participate in it. They've given up on voting. But I think now change is in the air. And change is in the air because of the young Black people and others who are out there protesting, speaking truth to power, and showing that they're not intimidated at all. I think the fathers and grandfathers are proud of what they're seeing. And I think this is inspiring. And I think that you guys being out there on the front line, registering people to vote, encouraging them to vote, is some of what it's going to take. That's much of what it's going to take. Coming from you and seeing the spirit that you have about participation in this democracy, no matter who or whom is trying to keep you out of it. So when you couple that with elected officials who constantly make this a part of what they do, wherever they're giving speeches, wherever they are with people, wherever they're doing virtual meetings, etc., always mentioning the census, getting counted, and voting, registering to vote. So if we're all engaged, we're all doing our part with what has happened in the streets, with all of the protests, I think we're going to get more Black males voting. I think there's more hope in the air, and I'm pleased about that. So again, don't underestimate the job that you're doing. When you walk up to an older Black man in particular, and you talk about voting, and I had one just the other day who told me they had never voted in their life, but they were going to vote now. I think that you can inspire them just by the fact of what you're doing. And so again, don't underestimate your power and your influence. Working with the elected officials, getting the ministers involved, asking for a special meeting of the men in the church with the minister, agreeing that they have to get registered to vote is extraordinarily important. And so this can be done. There are ways that it can be done. I know that, some of the ministers think about their 501c3 and whether or not they can be active, but yes, they can. It is how you do it and what you do. And I think the more you get up on that and you can advise people, and even people who have been incarcerated, sometimes they'll tell you, I'm sorry, I can't vote. I've been in prison. All you got to do is find out what the laws are of that state. In our state, for example, if you're not on probation or parole, you serve your time, you can vote. So find out what the laws are, who the registrar of voter is, how it works, how they place the polling places, how the absentee voting works. All of that will help to increase our voter participation, and Black men in particular.
Wonderful. And I think all of those action items and all those messages are definitely very good. One of the things that we've been seeing, obviously, across the country with the death of George Floyd, all the folks that you've mentioned, that we've lost so many Black lives to police brutality and state-led violence. And so for us, we are looking for, in our generation, a policy change, right? And so we're talking a lot about the election, which is important. We need to vote for those who are going to be the decision makers on policy. But when we're talking about divesting funds from local police departments to invest things in affordable housing or mental health awareness, etc., passing laws that will help protect our lives in this country. What ideas do you have? What actual tangible steps can Black men across the country be taking to engage with folks like you, right? Elected officials who are making the decisions that impact all of our lives every day. What steps can they take, Congresswoman?
Well, there are any number of things that can be done. First, let me talk about the local level. The police chiefs who have the supervision of all of the peace officers is an important person. How is that person chosen? Is that person appointed? Is that person elected? Get to know how that person becomes the police chief so that you can weigh in on the question of who should become police chief. If that is an open slot, and they are looking for or doing the kind of inquiries that are necessary to find out where there possibly are police chiefs who want to change locations. If they're doing the interviews, have some people that you're putting up, that the community is putting up. Get them in the mix to be considered. That's one thing. The other thing is the city council members have the budget of the police departments. They're the ones that determine their pay raises, their benefits, their vacations, their overtime, all of that. Oftentimes, they are intimidated, meaning the city council people who have the budgets. They're intimidated by the police unions, the police protective leagues, and they are intimidated by the police unions telling them that if you don't do what we want you to do, we're going to put money in against you in your elections. We're coming after you. And it has worked. And they intimidate the city council members. They intimidate the mayors, and they intimidate the police chiefs. That has to be undone. And the way that you do that is we get a group together, the group in your organization, and ask to meet with the head of the police union, who probably nobody ever thought about, and nobody really knows what the name is, but you can easily find that out. Meet with the police chief. Meet with members of the city council. Many times elected officials get away with not listening because nobody is calling them to task, calling them on accountability because they're not responding because nobody is asking them to do certain things. Others may be a little bit more intimidated, wanting to get reelected. Maybe even not what you consider progressive, maybe a little bit more conservative. But there's a lot of work to be done by requiring and requesting elected officials to meet with you, by meeting with the city council members in particular, meeting with the police chief and with the unions, dealing with this whole problem of what are the practices of the police department. What are you saying about the complaints that you have about police officers? What are you saying about how you deal with confrontation? Instead of creating more confrontation, how do you diffuse arguments? And even people who are acting out who may be mentally challenged, rather than shooting them, rather than killing them, rather than making the situation worse, what can you do to lessen hostility, to lessen, confrontation. And so a lot of this is being talked about now in ways that perhaps it has not been talked about in the past. The Congressional Black Caucus of Congress came up with a police reform bill, and they are doing a bill that would outlaw and get rid of the chokehold. Some jurisdictions have already done it, but it's not in law. They're talking about police having to assume some liability for their actions. They're talking about whether or not you have police who have bad records. There have been many complaints about them. They've fired that gun too many times. They've killed people, and they go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And if maybe they might get fired, or they leave and they change states, they get hired without any attention being given to their past record. So that being traced. And so we're looking at, through police reform and the Congressional Black Caucus, trying to pass a national bill that will help to deal with many of these issues. We've got a tough time. It's a good bill, but on the Senate side, it's being held up. They want to weaken it. They want to compromise this bill. The Congressional Black Caucus is not in a compromise mood and want to move forward with credible legislation that will lessen the deaths and the killings of people of color and young Black unarmed and young Black unarmed Latinos, etc. And so these are some of the things that you can interact with, both on the local level and the national level. Get a copy of the police reform bill at the national level. Go on the internet, use those platforms to give support to that legislation. Make sure that your members of Congress know that you are asking them to vote for that bill. Your senators, your U.S. senators are the ones who are holding it up. Make sure that you are doing everything that you can to put pressure on the United States Senate to pass that legislation. And don't forget your locals. Don't forget having that meeting with your local members of Congress and with the mayor and with the police chief. Thank you.
Wonderful, Congresswoman. I mean, I love the fact that you talked about the local impact, because I think people they go for the shiny object, the White House and Congress, and that's great. No disrespect to obviously those roles, but it's important for folks to know who's on city council, right? To know who's on county commissions and in their state legislature. Even for me, looking locally, even after everything that happened, I serve as vice chair of our Human Rights Commission for the city of Austin. And part of what we did was pass resolutions to recommend to our city council about changing the police chief, about divesting funding, about looking into releasing chokeholds, like getting rid of chokeholds. And so there are a lot of opportunities for folks that are listening that you can be involved on the local level. And I want to kind of move the conversation to more like leadership, right? That we're talking a lot about reform right now. We're obviously also talking about the election that's happening right now. One of the things that's important is that we want to see more Black men, along with our sisters, in leadership positions, right? And that whether that's elected, whether that's, like I said, boards and commissions. Even before you were in Congress, that we looked up that you obviously were a longtime member of the Democratic National Committee, served in the state assembly in California. So can you talk about the impact of being involved in community organizations, nonprofit boards and commissions for cities and counties? Can you talk about the importance of that in developing people's leadership into a pipeline so that we have more Black people in office at the table, so we're just not on the menu?
Well, I want to tell you, just before my meeting with you today, I had a meeting with the African American commissioners of the city of Los Angeles. And I was very pleased in what I saw, because what happened was I saw the volunteers that worked on the streets with us 30, 40 years ago, 45 years ago, many who were volunteers in campaigns, many who volunteered and worked with some nonprofit organizations, many who volunteered with the Democratic Party operation in their state. And now all of these volunteers who gave of their time because of their interest in making their communities more stable, more secure, and more involved are now sitting on the commissions where they're making decisions. And I looked in the faces of these people, some who had worked, with me on many occasions in campaigns, etc. And I thought, this is the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be that those people who show interest and who give of themselves get involved somewhere. And somewhere means that oftentimes you start out volunteering. Oftentimes it means that, you can get a job doing something that's important, that helps out with making your community a better place to live. But if you understand that showing up, if you don't do anything but show up at the city council, they always have a place on the city council for the public to speak. It's usually at the end of the program, and you don't even need to have been placed on the agenda and have made an appointment. But you get up and you share with them an issue that you want to see change on. And people oftentimes forget when they're looking in their community at whether or not the trash is getting picked up, whether or not the lights are working, whether or not the dogs are being handled in the way that they're straying. All of these are local issues that is about your quality of life and whether or not you have a safe and secure and comfortable community. So first of all, look at that and see, is my street paved? It hasn't. What's wrong with this sidewalk? Why haven't these trees been trimmed, etc.? Go to your city council. Let them see you come often. When you come often, then they're going to know that you're a person who they need to get to know better. And then they're going to invite you to be on certain things, to do certain things, because they recognize that you're willing to speak truth to power. And so I would like for many of those folks out there who have thoughts and think that thoughts don't mean anything or they can't do anything with them, I want you to connect your ideas with an individual. Get to know your city council person. Tell them what's on your mind. Get to know the minister. Get to know the head of an organization such as yours and talk about it and start to get involved. Trust your instincts. Build up your confidence. And that leads to greater and greater leadership. It always happens. You put in the time, you show the interest. People understand leadership when they see it and they feel it and they get it. And so people will start to come to you for answers and your opinion, etc. But it's all about making the move to get involved and to show what you care about, what you can do. And you will get the support to keep moving you to higher and higher levels of leadership. And once you get the leadership, you can't forget where you came from. And you've got to be not only responsible, but you got to be true to the people who helped you to get where you are. And so those are just a few thoughts about leadership.
Well, I think those are all very important because what we are looking for right now, Congresswoman, and I know you believe this as much as I and many folks who are watching, is we need authentic leadership. We need honest leadership, right? We need accountable leadership. And we're looking for that in this moment when so many lives have been lost either to COVID-19, other health disparities, police brutality. You can name the issue where we've lost Black lives across the history of this country. And so I think that we are calling for that authentic and progressive and forward-thinking leadership. And you've been on the front lines for so long for providing that and given all of us young folks, if you want to say, a little bit of the roadmap to be able to do that. And so we have a question coming out of the chat that I want to ask.
Before you do that,
yes,
I want to tell you that you guys have got to run for office. Mm-hmm. I want to tell you that right now you should be targeting the worst city councilman who's been there and has not done anything that you can't depend on. You need to decide who's going to run, then put all of your effort. And in these city council seats, you'd be surprised how you can win if you outwork them. And many of them have forgotten how to work. So I just want to tell you, run for office.
That's absolutely. I thank you for that. And I'm sure there are hopefully folks that are watching that are thinking, maybe I couldn't run for office or I shouldn't run for office. And one of the things I want to share as somebody who has worked on campaigns for so long and trains candidates is that you don't need to wait on permission. The saying goes, right, I'd rather ask for forgiveness than for permission. And if you see a need for a change in your community, step up and do it and knock on doors when it's safe to do so. make the phone calls, right? Send the bulletins and all those different things. So thank you for encouraging folks to run for office. We need that representation in our community. And so also I want to go back to the chat and ask the question that someone asked about increasing the age. The protest call for defund the police is being used against us. How can we adjust the messaging so that the goal is clear for our communities?
Well, you're absolutely right. When people first heard defund the police, many people got frightened and they thought you meant zero them out. You don't need police. That's not what the movement meant. The movement meant exactly what you see a few mayors have started to do, like the mayor here in Los Angeles. And that is review that police budget. See where there's fat and excess in that budget. Take that out of the budget and apply it to some place in your city where the need is great. I don't know what that is, whether it's homelessness, or whether it is a children's program, or whether it is making sure that we're doing everything we can for seniors so that they're safe and they're comfortable. It is about not simply zeroing out. It is about reimagining what police departments are and what they do. For example, if you know and you understand that a lot of money is being sent out in the way that police are responding to maybe a homeless person who's acting out, maybe that needs to be a mental health organization that has the contact with the city and the police department, however it's arranged, so that the right person goes out to deal with someone who has a mental health problem. They don't need to be locked up. They certainly don't need to be shot and killed because a confrontation occurs. As a matter of fact, police officers need to have on their agenda in the training or whatever they do is how you diffuse confrontation. When I take a look at some of these killings and I see how the police could have diffused the situation instead of getting into a situation where they use their gun, it is easy for me to reimagine the role of the police and what we can use them effectively to do and what they're wasting their time on and we're spending our precious dollars on and they should not be doing. So that's how we have to talk about it. And when people talk to you or your organization is talking about your platform and what you're working on, take the defund argument and try to help people understand that it is not talking about getting rid of police. It's not talking about zeroing out the budget. It is talking about taking the fat out of the budget, the excess out of the budget, that which should not be there, but it's only there for political reasons, and using that money and redirecting that money to where a great need is. It's going to take a lot of education. It's going to take a lot of education because, when policies like that are articulated in the beginning, the news media loves the controversial aspect of it. And they will talk about it in ways that does not help people to understand. But I think that it's incumbent on all of us to talk about it in ways that people will understand that that's a credible thing to think about, to talk about how you defund the police. And so I'm hoping that, as you work with all that you're working with, that you do everything that you can to help be a voice for how that works and how it can work. Thank you.
Absolutely. And one of the things I think about that question around defund the police that we have to acknowledge for our community is imagine if those resources were going into our schools, into programs to help folks with mental health and other socioeconomic issues, because there are a lot of economic disparities that even lead Black men and Black women to even be susceptible to being suspect by police, right? And so a lot of if we can deal with some of those conditions before they even have to have those negative encounters or even life-altering encounters with the police, I think that's the work that we have to be thinking about doing. It's not just about the dollars, it's about where the dollars go and who the dollars go to and who can receive the benefit for the dollars. And so you're speaking very truth to power. I think we have another question in the chat that's going to pop up on the screen. Someone asks, what about increasing the age requirement to become a police officer nationally? So do you have any quick thoughts about that, Congresswoman?
I don't have any thoughts about it. I don't know whether a young officer is better or an older officer is better. I've not given a lot of thought to it, but here's what I do believe. I believe that could be police officers need to be vetted better. You need to know something about their history. You need to know where they come from. You need to understand what their beliefs are, or whether or not there are biases in the interview that you're detected. You need to understand whether or not there's a racist background. I think that there are better ways to understand who you're bringing in to the police force through the vetting process. But I've not thought a lot about age, and I don't really know what the minimum age is at this point.
Okay, well, there we go. Is there another question? I think we have another one that's going to pop up here. Okay, so Lynette says, we have to realize that unions can serve a good purpose. However, it seems that police unions defend and sometimes successfully defend police actions, no matter how egregious they are. Is there any effort underway to remove some of the power of the police unions? I know you talked a lot about the policing legislation that's happening in Congress, but what about the unions and the power they have with elected officials and across society?
Well, I really do think that the police unions have to be confronted by the elected officials and the mayor. I think that they've had too much control and too much influence. And of course, they're organized in the way that unions organize. And there may come sometimes a period in the bargaining with them that they may be able to do something. I don't know exactly who on each of these city councils or in the mayor's office is bargaining, but I think that a lot can be done when it's time to bargain and it is time to deal with what they're asking for. So I think that has to happen. And I think the city council people are just going to have the courage. They're going to have to stand up. Of course, there are police officers who are doing a great job and doing what we would have them to do. And their record as police officers will show that. They will not be the ones that you get constant complaints on. They will not be the one who's always trying to game the system and who are in there fighting for the continuations of silence. This business of that silent code that they have, if you're a partner with another police officer, no matter what that police officer does, you may not tell it. You never will tell the truth. Even if you see them take out a gun and shoot an unarmed person who is presenting no threat, you as a partner must honor the code of silence. That code of silence must be broken up. And so we must talk about that in some ways with the police unions and see what can be done in the bargaining. But mostly it's in the hands of the city council members and the mayors.
Okay, yes, wonderful, Congresswoman, and thank you so much. One of the things, obviously, as we've mentioned, that this is an election, and we are running our Black Lives Matter, right? And folks say that a lot, right? And people post it on social media. People made shirts and hats, and now we see murals across the country. And so one of the things that we're moving this work to is that, one, Black Lives Matter is not a moment; it's humanity for Black people in this country. But two, that the people that support Black Lives Matter is moving toward action and the action around this election. And so someone asked a question about the Electoral College and how it can sometimes be a barrier in terms of the actual election result, as we saw in the previous election. And so someone asked basically to explain it in layman's terms, but not only explain it, but also that they're concerned about it. So how do we address the concerns in terms of we're asking people to show up and vote and how the popular vote may not actually elect the person we want? So can you talk a little bit about that and how we need to run?
Let me talk a little bit about the Electoral College, and that's this. It's in the Constitution, and it was placed in the Constitution basically by white men who helped to write and develop the Constitution. And it was really about land ownership. And it was about those areas where they could get what would be considered the most votes in order to be able to determine who got elected president of the United States. And that Electoral College is ensconced in the Constitution. But I want to tell you for the first time, and the only way that you can undo it is through a constitutional convention that has to be called of all the states and voted on by the United States Congress, or either or. Either it is through a convention or it's voted on by the United States Congress, which you can never get enough votes to undo the Electoral College, and you can never get enough states together signed on to deal with the Electoral College. But for the first time, I'm hearing from the Supreme Court that they may be about to take up some issue that deals with the Electoral College and the fairness or unfairness of the Electoral College. I don't know enough about it yet to see which way they are going to attack this or delve into this, but it is about centering power and directing power in ways that ensures that certain areas have more influence than others. And that's the best way that I can explain it to you.
Wonderful. There we go. So want to see if there are any last questions. I know we're getting ready to wrap up. We are so grateful that you could be with us for a whole hour. We know that you are busy leading our work around the Financial Services Committee to make sure that we are financially sound, but also to make sure that consumers are protected in this work. And so the last question that I'll ask is around the flip side of the election. When you talked a little bit in your remarks about voter suppression, how we're dealing with not being able to vote by mail in some states in the midst of a pandemic where people have to decide between their safety and their health and actually showing up to the polls to have their voice be heard. When we talk about states with ID laws, states now are rolling back polling locations under the pandemic, right? And so when we're dealing with those, what are some ways that we can combat the suppression that people who do want to show up in good faith, how do we combat that suppression so they can actually participate in the process?
Well, much of that starts with your state legislators, and you've got to know who they are, where you can get support when something is developing in legislatures that will suppress the vote, and there's a lot of that going on. Or you've got to get to know who the state, the county registrar of voters are, and who is holding the power. But with the state legislatures, the right wing have set out to come up with laws that would suppress the vote in so many ways. And you often don't think about it in terms of, for example, IDs. It sounds pretty reasonable, I guess, that you would be requested to show an ID when you get to the polls. However, we must never forget what they will accept as IDs. And some of what they should accept, they don't. They don't want to accept student IDs as credible representation for whom you are. And you also need to know that when you go back in time, there are still many of our relatives, great grandmothers, etc., that don't have birth certificates in order to present where they want them to be presented in order to get an ID. So working on making sure people have IDs in states that require it, understanding the laws that are being presented that smack of voter suppression. For example, taking a look at the rolls, the voting rolls, and cleaning them by determining in the state legislature who has not voted in the last number of elections. And that could be arbitrary. Who didn't vote in the last 4 elections? Take them off the rolls. That's a way of suppressing the vote by denying people who vote who may not have voted, but on this election, they really want to vote. But now they are off the rolls because the state legislature decided that they were going to clean and reduce the voter rolls. So pay attention to voter suppression as it rears its ugly head in so many different ways. And I've alluded to a few of them. The old suppression, you won't encounter like poll taxes as such, but the new ways of doing it, just by reducing the number of polling places and making people stand in line for hours, is voter suppression. So get on top of that. That's extraordinarily important.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. That was our last question, Congresswoman. And for everyone who's watching, I just want to thank you so much again and just reiterate how honored we are that you made space in your busy schedule. Like I said, fighting for our people, fighting for consumers. Obviously, the work you did on the stimulus and the CARES Act and moving valuable resources and valuable assistance to people who are dealing right now with this pandemic. And so to get you with us for an hour to show your support for Amplify Action, we hope to still be able to continue and partner with you in meaningful ways so that we can continue to grow this work and continue to elevate the conversation there. So I know we didn't get to all the questions, but for those of you who are still in the chat, you can leave your questions in the chat. The Amplify Action team will be able to go in there and get those questions and be able to follow up. And then also you can visit us at ampourvote.com. You see it on the ticker down below, right? There you go. So ampourvote.com. And so we want you to go on there to get information, sign up for the email list to get regular updates, follow us on social media, send donations if that's what you choose to do. And if you're able to do that. And so again, I just want to thank you so much, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, for joining us today for this virtual conversation. And before we wrap up, we're going to bring back our Executive Director, Brandon Upson, for a few closing remarks. Brandon?
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, and I think we're also going to bring someone who's very familiar, Lawrence Wilson, up. I think he wants to say thank you as well. Congresswoman Lawrence, go ahead.
Thank you so much, woman. I hope you're doing well. I really appreciate you taking the opportunity to really amplify the Black community. You've been doing it for such a long time in our hometown of St. Louis, but also in Los Angeles where you've represented. Thank you so much, Brandon and Jamar and Yaladria and Ariel and the Amplify team for bringing me a part of this important conversation.
Yeah, and if we can leave everybody on in the background, producers, Congresswoman, when I had the vision to start something like this, specifically focused on Black men, at first I was really nervous about coming out and saying that we're going to create power in our community through the empowerment and the mobilization of Black men. As you know, there's a lot of folks out there who are fearful of what we can achieve if we have the knowledge, the tools, and the ability to cast our vote. There's billions, even trillions of dollars that we can point our finger at to what's been put in place to try to stop us from casting a ballot. And I am just overwhelmed with joy that you saw it not robbery to join us today and to support us with this most valuable part of your resources, your time to be here. We are going to do this work and we're going to do it the right way. I want us to be the organization that engages Black men, whether they're in the quote unquote hood or if they're in the suites on Main Street, so that we can unite our voices, amplify our actions, and do what we need to do to change the face of our communities. And I think, it's a personification of your work over a long period of time on the ground. And I just thank you again. I can't thank you enough.
Well, you're so very welcome. And I thank you for inviting me. And I thank Lawrence for his care and his concern. We talk a lot and he's always talking about how we can do something, how we can get more people registered, how we can get people voting. He's talking about the campaigns. This is what he lives, sleeps, and breathes. And so I'm very pleased about the fact that he cares so very much to connect us today. And when you talk about time, what better way to spend time than talking with people who are doing something? And your name, the name of the organization, Amplify Action, speaks to it all. And I'm appreciative for you and what you're doing. And I'm pleased I was able to spend time with you, and feel free to call on me. And I will do everything that I can to be supportive of your actions. And when this pandemic is past and I'm in the area, I'm going to come see you.
Thank you so much. We'll be calling. Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So everybody, like Jamar said earlier, to learn more about Amplify Action's work, what we're doing, how you can get involved, just go to ampourvote.com. It's on the ticker below. That's again, ampourvote.com, so that you can help us amplify our action. This work cannot be done in a silo. One person can't do it, and I just have to take a moment right now to thank my team who had come together to make this possible. Jamar Brown, our senior advisor, Rashad Gaines, our co-founder, Eladria Drummond, our engagement director, Ariel Cassell, our communications director, Joe White, our digital director, and I feel like Sheena Matthews, our director of development, who is from North Carolina and just an integral part of our team. Have to shout out Tiffany Von Jones, who was a big help at getting us to amplify this across the media. I need to thank BET, yes, Black Entertainment Television, for coming on. It was very last minute, but they came on and helped us push and promote this live event. This work is what it's going to take for us to truly gain the equitable, fair, and just society that we all deserve. It starts with the conversations and the information, and then it leads into that action on the ground. So to do this, we need the resources to be able to reach those folks that we deserve to reach. And I just want to ask you, our community, our village, will you join us in this fight? Will you support us and make a donation of at least $25 today, or whatever you can afford to give? $25 goes a very, very long way. When we think about this work and how we're engaging people online as well as on the ground responsibly, $25 can literally help us register 4 to 5 Black men. Now, when we talk about our goal is to register 110,000 Black men across the South. Why the South? Because that is where the biggest growth in our Black population lives. That is where if we can gain power in the South as a community, I believe that we can change the face of America. Just look at what comes out of some of these states and how it impacts our community. The definition of economic power is organized people plus organized money. And we are doing that work, and we need your help to do it. So the organized people part, join us. Follow us on Facebook. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, we're there. Snapchat, we're there. Join us into making phone calls and sending out text message, which will be starting soon, but also that organized money. I remember a story that was told to me about the Million Men's March in '95 that took place in Washington, D.C. And one of the speakers came up to the podium and asked everyone to reach in their pocket and raise $1 bill above their head. When they did that, he said, "We just raised $1 million. Can't nobody tell me that our community does not have the resources we need to impact the change that can be felt for a whole generation. Can't nobody tell me that we don't have the skills, the resources, and the might to get out there and do it for ourselves." That's what Amplify Action represents. And with you, not only will we represent it, but we will get it done. Please join us. I thank you again from the bottom of my heart to everyone who took the time to spend this evening with us. Please, at the bottom, you see our slogan: together we will build, we will rise, and we will amplify until this country is fair and just for everyone. And we're doing it one Black man at a time. Thank you so much for joining us. Visit us at ampourvote.com, and we look forward to working with you very soon. Thank you, and have a great day.